What happens when the ocean's most feared predators come across unsuspecting adventurers? From fatal encounters during diving expeditions to sudden ambushes at sea, these real-life tales reveal the terrifying power of sharks and the devastating impact of these unexpected, life-altering moments. Brace yourself for these 6 stories. The ocean of New Zealand stretched endlessly before them, rolling waves rising and falling beneath the golden afternoon sun. Maya and Ethan paddled further from shore, the rhythmic sound of their hands slicing through the water blending with the distant cries of seagulls. The waves had been strong that day, each set carrying an irresistible promise of adrenaline. Maya, always the more daring of the two, had led them farther than usual, her excitement outweighing any hesitation. Ethan followed, trusting her instincts but feeling a quiet unease settle in his chest as the shoreline shrank behind them. Then, without warning, the water beneath him shifted violently. A shadow, massive and impossibly fast, surged beneath the surface. Before Ethan could react, something struck his board with bone-rattling force, sending him tumbling into the sea. The water rushed in as he fought to orient himself, his vision blurred by the swirling salt water. He surfaced, gasping for breath, his arms flailing as his board drifted out of reach. Panic gripped his chest as he turned, scanning the water for Maya. She was still on her board, eyes wide, body frozen. And then he saw it. The great white shark cut through the water like a living torpedo, its dorsal fin slicing the surface as it circled back. The sheer size of it sent a jolt of terror through Ethan's veins. It wasn't just a shark, it was a predator, ancient and relentless, and it was coming for them. Ethan's breath came in short, panicked bursts as he kicked frantically toward the shore, heart hammering, instinct screaming at him to escape. Every stroke through the water felt painfully slow, his body heavy with exhaustion and fear. Behind him, Maya moved, but not toward safety. She was heading straight for the shark. Realization struck Ethan like a wave crashing down. She was trying to distract it, to draw it away from him. His stomach twisted in horror as she slapped the surface of the water, her board rocking beneath her. The shark turned, its massive body angling toward her. Maya's muscles burned as she paddled, her breath sharp and shallow, every instinct in her body screaming at her to flee. But she forced herself to stay, to keep the shark's attention locked on her. She knew what she was doing. She had read about attacks and had seen the statistics. Sharks rarely targeted humans deliberately, but this wasn't an accident. It had already struck once, it was aggressive, and Ethan was vulnerable in the open water. The shark closed in, its body a monstrous shadow just beneath the surface. Then it struck. The shark lunged from below, its powerful jaws clamping onto her leg with crushing force. A sharp, searing pain shot through her as teeth sliced through flesh, bone grinding beneath the pressure. The world spun as she was yanked violently from her board and dragged beneath the surface in an instant. Ethan's scream was swallowed by the ocean. Maya fought with everything she had, her body thrashing as she kicked and struck at the beast. The water around her darkened with blood, a cloud of crimson billowing outward as the shark shook her like a rag doll. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred, and her body screamed for air as she clawed desperately at the water, at the shark, at anything to break free. Then, as suddenly as it had attacked, the shark released her. She shot to the surface, gasping, her body weak, her limbs trembling. Ethan was there, his arms wrapping around her, his frantic strokes pulling them toward shore. But Maya could feel it. Something was wrong. The water beneath her felt heavy, the warmth spreading down her legs sickeningly unnatural. Ethan's breath came in desperate, panicked bursts as he fought against the tide, dragging her with him. The shore was too far, the waves felt too strong, and the blood in the water, it would only bring the shark back. He knew it. Maya's head lolled against his shoulder. Her breaths were shallow and uneven. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but no words came. Her body was going limp in his arms. Ethan couldn't believe what was happening to his girlfriend. He kicked harder, his muscles screaming, and his lungs burning. The shoreline was there, so close, but it might as well have been miles away. The shark didn't return. It had vanished into the depths, its hunger momentarily satisfied, but the damage had been done. By the time Ethan reached the shallows, staggering onto the wet sand with Maya in his arms, he knew. He collapsed to his knees, his hands pressed against the gaping wound on her leg, but the blood wouldn't stop. It soaked into the sand, mingling with the surf that rushed around them. Maya's eyes fluttered, her grip on his arm weak, slipping, and then she was still. The waves crashed against the shore, unrelenting, indifferent. The ocean that had given them so much, the thrill, the beauty, the freedom, had taken everything in a single, merciless moment. Ethan sat there, holding her, his body trembling, his heart pounding in his ears. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, a cruel contrast to the darkness settling in his chest. She had saved him. And now, she was gone. Ethan would love her and honor her bravery for the rest of his life. The boat rocked gently on the turquoise waves of the Bahamas. The tourists dressed in sleek wetsuits listened closely as their guide ran through the final safety briefing. Excitement buzzed through the group as they prepared to descend into the depths, eager for the once-in-a-lifetime experience of diving alongside the legendary tiger sharks that ruled these waters. 40-year-old Tim adjusted his mask, his fingers trembling slightly as he secured the strap. He had always been fascinated by sharks but had never been this close to them before. The brochures had promised a controlled encounter, a thrilling but safe dive led by experts who understood the behavior of these massive predators. The guide, a seasoned diver with years of experience, assured them once more that tiger sharks were generally docile and curious but not aggressive. But was he telling the truth? One by one they entered the water, the sensation shocking against their skin as they descended toward the ocean floor. Sunlight pierced through the surface and illuminated the vast, open expanse of blue. The dive site had been carefully chosen, a sandy bottom with scattered coral formations, an area known for its frequent tiger shark visits. At first, everything was calm. Schools of fish drifted lazily around them, and the rhythmic sound of bubbles filled the silence. Then, as if summoned by their presence, a shadow materialized from the deep. The tiger shark was enormous, at least 14 feet long, its striped body gliding effortlessly through the water. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, weaving between the divers, its dark eyes scanning them with quiet curiosity. The group remained still just as instructed, their breaths controlled, their movements minimal. The guide maintained eye contact with the shark, his body language calm and confident. For several minutes, the shark circled, assessing the strange intruders in its domain. The tension in the water was palpable, somewhere between awe and an unspoken awareness of the predator's power. Then, something shifted. Tim, unable to suppress the growing unease clawing at his gut, made a mistake. His breathing quickened, his muscles tensed, and without thinking, he shifted abruptly, his body jerking slightly backward. To the shark, the sudden movement was like a signal, a break in the quiet rhythm of the dive. In an instant, its curiosity turned to something else. It was no longer only a beautiful animal, it was a killer. The massive head tilted, the black eyes locking onto Tim, and then in a terrifying burst of speed, it lunged. Tim didn't have time to react. A crushing pressure clamped down on his shoulder, the force of the bite sending a shockwave of pain through his body. He felt the sharp, serrated teeth pierce through the wetsuit, slicing into flesh and muscle. Blood clouded the water in an instant. Dark and ominous, panic erupted. The guide moved fast, gripping a metal pole and thrusting it between the shark's jaws, prying it away from Tim. The shark recoiled, its body twisting as it retreated, but it didn't leave. It circled again, faster now, its movements no longer passive. The scent of blood had ignited its instincts. Tim struggled to stay upright, his vision blurring as pain pulsed through his shoulder. The water around him was thick with red, his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. His wetsuit was shredded, the fabric hanging in tatters where the shark's teeth had torn through. His body screamed for air, but the moment demanded stillness, control. Any more sudden movements could draw the shark right back to him. The other divers, caught in the chaos, tried to remain motionless, but fear had already begun unraveling their discipline. One of them flinched as the shark brushed past, the heavy body knocking him off balance. Another gasped into her regulator as the predator looped around, its massive tail sweeping dangerously close. The guide was already signaling to the group, urging them upward. They needed to surface. Now. With careful, measured movements, they began their ascent, but the shark wasn't done. It shadowed them, its presence an unrelenting threat beneath their fins. It moved closer again, brushing against one of the divers, testing, waiting. The boat was visible above, but the distance felt endless. The open water suddenly something akin to a death sentence. The guide stayed at the rear, his eyes locked onto the predator, using the pole to create distance whenever it ventured too close. Every second stretched unbearably long, every kick upward felt agonizingly slow. The surface shimmered above them, but the threat below was still too close. Tim's arm felt useless, his strength draining with every drop of blood that dispersed into the sea. His mind swam with dizziness, but he forced himself to keep moving, to follow the others toward the safety of the boat. His lungs burned, his thoughts blurred, but survival pushed him forward. The moment their heads broke the surface, chaos exploded anew. The crew on the boat was already in motion, hauling them aboard one by one. Tim barely registered the hands gripping him, pulling him out of the water. The cold air hit his face as he collapsed onto the deck, his wetsuit slick with blood. Someone pressed a towel against his shoulder, the pressure sending fresh waves of pain through him. The rest of the group scrambled aboard, their breaths ragged, their bodies shaking. The shark remained below, its shadow visible just beneath the waves, still circling and watching. But the dive was over. The ocean had given them a warning, a reminder of its raw, untamed power. The boat's engine roared to life, cutting through the water as they sped toward the shore. Tim's body felt heavy, his mind slipping in and out of focus, but he could hear the frantic voices around him, the rush of movement as someone wrapped his arm in bandages, trying to slow the bleeding. By the time they reached the dock, an ambulance was waiting. Medics moved swiftly, lifting him onto a stretcher, assessing his injuries. The bite was severe, the wound deep, but he was alive. As the ambulance doors closed, Tim stared up at the sky, his breath shallow but steady. The ocean had taken its toll, had left its mark, but he had survived. He knew he would never see it the same way again. The ocean stretched endlessly around Zoe, a deep blue expanse shimmering under the Australian sun. The wind carried the scent of salt and fish, the gentle rocking of her boat barely noticeable. Zoe had built her career on moments like this, alone with her rod, the camera rolling, and her audience watching in real time. She adjusted her cap and checked the chat streaming on her phone, mounted securely beside her. Thousands were watching, waiting and anticipating her next big catch. The waters were rich with life, and today she was after something impressive. She had teased her audience about the strong pull she had felt earlier, hinting at a trophy fish. What she hadn't told them was that she was fishing in waters known for bull sharks. Zoe had been on the water her whole life, comfortable in its unpredictability. She knew the risks, but she never felt fear, just respect. She believed that as long as she stayed in the boat, controlled the fight and didn't get careless, she was in no real danger. A sudden, violent tug on her line nearly wrenched the rod from her hands. Her muscles strained as she braced herself, her pulse quickening with excitement. The chat exploded with messages, her viewers urging her on, guessing what she had hooked. The rod bent sharply, the drag screaming as the unseen force below pulled hard. She widened her stance, struggling to keep control. Whatever she had on the line was powerful, thrashing just beneath the surface, but she was determined to bring it in. Then, without warning, the water erupted. A massive shape surged from below, a blur of dark gray and white as it exploded from the sea, its head breaching the surface. The shark slammed against the boat's edge with a force that sent vibrations through the hull. Before Zoe could react, the impact knocked her off balance. Her footing slipped. The world tilted. And in an instant, she was in the water. The moment her body hit the surface, cold panic crashed over her. The chat that had been buzzing with excitement turned into a flood of horrified messages as her camera, still streaming, captured her flailing arms and her desperate struggle to keep afloat. The current pulled at her as her heart pounded in her chest, the salt water stinging her eyes. She gasped for air, her limbs fighting against the weight of the ocean. And then she saw the shark turning. The bull shark, nearly 9 feet long, was moving with precision, drawn back by the chaos, the disturbance, and the unmistakable vibrations of a struggling body in the water. Zoe kicked hard, trying to propel herself away from the animal, toward anything that could give her an edge, but she knew it was futile. The shark closed the distance with shocking speed, its powerful body cutting through the water. When it struck, Zoe could swear this was what a car crash felt like. The force knocked the air from her lungs, a crushing weight slamming into her side as teeth carved deep into her flesh. The pain was instant and blinding, her body twisting violently as she was yanked downward. She barely had time to process what was happening before she was beneath the surface, the water around her turning red. She kicked, punched, fought, every survival instinct firing at once. But the shark was relentless. It shook its head, tearing flesh from bone, dragging her deeper. The pressure in her chest built as her oxygen drained and her movements were frantic but weakening. Her mind screamed at her to fight, to keep going, but the shark's grip was too strong, its power unmatched. The water around her churned with red clouds of blood as the beast released her for a brief second, repositioning for another strike. Zoe tried to push toward the light above, her vision blurring, her strength fading, but she wasn't fast enough. The shark surged forward again, its jaws clamping down with devastating force. Above, the stream continued. Viewers watched in frozen horror. The once exciting broadcast transformed into something nightmarish. Some screamed at their screens, pleading for someone to do something. Others frantically tried to contact the Coast Guard, but no one could reach her in time. On a nearby boat, another streamer who had been fishing close by was already moving. He had seen Zoe go over, had seen the shark strike, and without thinking, he gunned his engine, racing toward the scene. As he approached, The water's surface was still rippling violently, dark streaks spreading out like ink in the sea. He threw a life preserver into the water, searching desperately for movement. But Zoe wasn't there. Only the endless waves, rolling gently under the midday sun, gave any sign of the violence that had just taken place beneath them. Minutes stretched into an eternity before emergency responders arrived. Boats combed the area, divers plunged beneath the surface, but deep down they knew the truth. Zoe was gone. Her body was recovered later, carried miles from where she had vanished. The shark had done what sharks do, responding to the instincts that had ruled them for millions of years. There was no malice in its attack, no intention beyond the response to an opportunity. But that truth did little to ease the horror of what had happened. The news became viral, turning what had been a routine live stream into a global headline. Footage of her final moments circulated online, dissected, analyzed, and debated. Some called it a tragic accident, an unavoidable risk of the ocean. Others blamed her, saying she had been reckless, that she had knowingly placed herself in dangerous waters for the sake of views. The conversation grew heated. Experts weighed in on the growing trend of live-streamed extreme sports and outdoor adventures, questioning whether real-time content had made people careless in their pursuit of spectacle. Viewers who had once cheered her on now argued over who was responsible, whether the charter companies should be held accountable, or whether more precautions should have been taken. But none of it changed the fact that Zoe was gone. Her channel, once a hub of adventure and excitement, became a memorial. Fans left messages of grief, clips of their favorite moments, and memories of the woman who had brought them along on every journey, who had shared her passion with the world. The ocean had been her second home, her greatest love, and in the end, it had taken her. For days, the water where she had vanished remained eerily quiet. Fewer boats, fewer tourists, as if the ocean itself had swallowed the memory of what had happened. But the sharks still swam beneath the waves, moving through the currents as they always had, unchanged, untouched by the tragedy that had unfolded in their realm. The waves rolled steadily beneath the sleek, dark hull of the small reconnaissance boat as it cut through the waters off the Australian coast in May 2004. The midday sun reflected off the endless blue, the salt air thick and familiar. Lieutenant Eric Davis stood near the edge, gripping the rail, scanning the horizon. He had spent years training for unpredictable situations, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for what was about to unfold. Davis was 34, a disciplined and highly skilled officer, known for his sharp instincts and steady composure under pressure. He had completed multiple deployments, excelling in high-risk operations, but this was just a routine training mission. Navigation drills, tactical maneuvering, and small team coordination. The crew of 6 was relaxed, performing their tasks with ease, confident in the controlled nature of the exercise. As they neared a shallow stretch of water, one of the men pointed to a dark shadow moving beneath the surface. At first it seemed distant, a mere shape gliding through the depths, but as the boat slowed, the form grew clearer. A great white shark, at least 15 feet long, was circling beneath them, its powerful body cutting smoothly through the water. The crew watched in quiet awe. Great whites were not uncommon in these waters, and while their presence was always a reminder of the ocean's raw, untamed nature, they rarely posed a direct threat to boats. The shark moved with rapid motions, its dorsal fin slicing through the surface before dipping back down. It seemed indifferent to them, uninterested in the vessel floating above. And then it changed direction. The shark accelerated, turning sharply toward the boat, its movements no longer casual but purposeful. It swam parallel for a moment, as if sizing up the craft, before vanishing beneath the surface. The sudden shift in its behavior sent a ripple of unease through the crew. Before anyone could react, the water exploded. The great white lunged upward, its massive head crashing against the side of the boat with staggering force. The impact sent a violent jolt through the vessel, knocking several men off their feet. The boat rocked dangerously, the metal hull groaning under the unexpected blow. Eric Davis, standing closest to the rail, felt his footing give way. The force of the strike sent him sprawling backward, and before he could catch himself, his body pitched over the edge. Cold water engulfed him. The shock hit first, the disorienting rush of salt water filling his mouth, his nose, his ears. He kicked hard, breaking the surface, gasping for air. His crew was already moving, shouts filling the air, and hands scrambling to throw him a rope. But before he could reach for it, the shadow beneath him shifted. The shark had turned back. It moved even faster now. Davis desperately looked around him, but there was nothing he could use to save himself. The shark struck from below, ramming him with astonishing force that had sent him flying in the air. Then the teeth came. A row of razor-sharp fangs clamped down on his torso, slicing through flesh and muscle in a single devastating bite. A searing pain ripped through his body as the shark's powerful jaws crushed into him, dragging him under. The crew watched in horror as the sea churned violently, their commanding officer vanishing beneath the surface. A desperate scramble erupted on deck. Ropes thrown, arms reaching, weapons grabbed, but none of it mattered. The shark wasn't finished. Below the surface, Davis fought with everything he had. He thrashed, struggling against the crushing force of the predator's grip, but the power of the beast was overwhelming. It shook its head violently, tearing through muscle and bone, the movement ripping him apart with terrifying efficiency. His vision blurred as pain flooded his body, his lungs burning as his last reserves of air disappeared. The great white released him for a moment, repositioning its grip. A brief, agonizing second of weightlessness passed before the final strike came. The jaws closed again, pulling him deeper. Above, the water's surface rippled, then stilled. The ocean swallowed the chaos, leaving behind only the eerie, spreading stain of blood. The crew stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Seconds stretched into an eternity before someone moved, yanking the throttle, turning the boat in a frantic circle. A man dove in, searching the depths, but there was nothing left to find. By the time the Coast Guard arrived, there was no sign of Lieutenant Davis. Only the vast, indifferent ocean remained. The official reports would later describe the attack as highly unusual, an aggressive and unprovoked incident. Experts speculated that the shark had been drawn by the vibrations of the boat, triggered by the sudden movement of the crew. Others argued that it had mistaken the vessel for a wounded animal, acting on instinct rather than intent. None of it mattered to those who had been there. For the people aboard that boat, the ocean would never be the same. The Caribbean water was a deep, mesmerizing blue, the sun casting sharp beams through the surface, lighting up the coral below. Sarah, Emily, and Hannah, experienced divers and renowned wildlife filmmakers, were excited as they descended into the water, each with a camera in hand. They were on a mission to capture rare footage of oceanic white-tip sharks, known for their unpredictable behavior, but also their incredible beauty. With years of experience under their belts, the three women were prepared for whatever the ocean would throw at them. Sarah, the leader of the group, was calm and steady. Born in Hawaii, she had spent most of her life underwater, her passion for sharks shaping her career. Emily was the technical expert, constantly adjusting her equipment to get the perfect shot. Hannah, the youngest, was the most eager of the three, always the first to volunteer for a dive. Together, they made a powerful team. They had filmed countless documentaries in dangerous waters, but today was different. Today, they were about to get closer to the apex predator of the open ocean than they had ever dared before. They dove further away from the boat, the ocean opening up around them. The water felt cool and refreshing, a welcome relief from the heat of the sun above. As they swam deeper, they marveled at the silence and the life surrounding them. Small fish darted past, and the coral reef below was teeming with color. They moved in synchronized harmony, their cameras capturing every moment. But the sharks, elusive as always, were nowhere to be seen. Minutes passed. Then, from the corner of her eye, Sarah saw the fin. It was unmistakable. The shark was large, its body long and sleek, cutting through the water with quiet power. An oceanic white-tip, a species known for its curiosity and sometimes erratic behavior, was circling them. At first it seemed indifferent, gliding silently at a distance, almost invisible in the deep blue. But then it moved closer. Emily's camera caught its movement, but Sarah's instincts flared first. She waved her arm, signaling the others to stay calm, but her pulse quickened. The shark was studying them. Sarah wasn't sure they could survive if the shark decided to attack, and then it did just that. The shark's movements were sudden and brutal. In one swift motion, it lunged toward Sarah, its massive jaws snapping. The shark's teeth sank deep into her arm. The pain was immediate, white-hot, and blinding. Sarah gasped, the force of the bite pulling her toward the depths. The shark shook its head, twisting and tearing at her flesh. Emily screamed, though it was muffled by the water, and instinctively swam closer to help. But in her panic, she was careless. The shark turned sharply toward her, and its teeth grazed her side, just below her ribs. She gasped, the shock of the wound more from the closeness of the predator than the pain. Hannah, who had been closest to Sarah, turned just in time to see the shark veer toward her. The massive body struck her legs, knocking her sideways. She cried out in pain, feeling the brutal force of the shark's weight and the rush of water as it swept her away. The trio struggled to react, every movement feeling like slow motion. Blood mixed with the seawater around them, the scent of it sharp in the open ocean. The shark, its attack over for the moment, circled them again, its sleek body moving with terrifying speed. It was now a hunt. Sarah, her arm dripping with blood, managed to stop her descent. She focused, trying to stay calm, but every fiber of her being screamed for the surface. Emily, holding her side where the shark had grazed her, managed to reach out and grab Hannah's arm, pulling her towards the boat. But the shark was fast, moving in tight circles around them, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Hannah's leg was bleeding heavily, the gash from the shark's strike deep enough to be dangerous. She gritted her teeth, her legs aching, but the adrenaline pumping through her kept her moving. They needed to get to the surface. They needed to get to the boat. The water seemed endless, each stroke taking more effort than the last. The shark didn't relent. It circled them, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Sarah's heart raced. She had been in dangerous situations before, but never like this. Never with the unmistakable feeling that they were being trapped. Minutes felt like hours. They fought to keep their heads above water, knowing they had to get back to the boat before the shark made its move. The boat captain, who had been watching from a distance, had already seen the chaos unfold. He gunned the engine, heading straight for them, but they were still too far away. The shark was closing in. Finally, the boat appeared, just in time. The captain threw a rope into the water and the women reached for it desperately. Emily was the first to grab it, pulling herself toward the side of the boat with all her strength. Sarah, bloodied and exhausted, followed. Her arm nearly useless, but her will strong. Hannah, her leg throbbing with pain, was next. They scrambled to the boat, the shark still circling beneath them, the water bubbling with its presence. Once on board, the crew immediately went into action, pulling the women aboard and making sure they were stable. The captain radioed for help. The Coast Guard alerted, but the threat had passed. The shark was gone. The women were shaken, but they had survived. Their cameras, still running, had caught the entire ordeal. The footage was raw, unfiltered, a testament to the unpredictability of the creatures they had sought to film. The days following the incident were filled with pain and reflection. Sarah's arm was bandaged, Emily's side was healing, and Hannah's leg required stitches. They had each been lucky, but luck was not something they took for granted. The attack had raised questions about the behavior of oceanic whitetips, their tendency to become aggressive in certain situations, and how little was truly understood about their predatory instincts. In the end, the women were left with a deep respect for the power of the ocean and the creatures that called it home. They had gone into the water to document the majesty of the sharks, but they had emerged with a new understanding of the risks and a humbling reminder that, sometimes, the ocean was in control. The waters off the coast of South Africa were calm that morning, the early sunlight shimmering across the surface as the boat rocked gently, anchored near a popular shark cage dive site. Megan and Chloe, both avid travelers, were visiting the region for a thrilling expedition. The ocean had always drawn them in, and this was to be their greatest adventure yet, diving into the world of great white sharks. The pair had spent months planning their trip, excited by the idea of encountering one of the ocean's most feared predators from the safety of a cage. Megan, the more adventurous of the two, was quick to dive into any challenge. Chloe, quieter but equally curious, often found herself following Megan's lead, always trusting her friend's enthusiasm. Together they made the perfect pair, balanced in their approach to life and exploration, but each with a deep respect for nature and its wonders. The plan was simple. They would enter the cage and descend into the clear blue depths to get an up-close look at the sharks. They had done their research. They knew that the sharks were dangerous, but the cage would provide a safe buffer, allowing them to observe the creatures without worry. The day began as expected, with the group entering the water and watching in awe as the sharks swam lazily around them. It was an experience they had dreamed of for years, but the mood shifted when the dive guide noticed a larger shark approaching, one that was much more active than the others. The shark, a great white, was circling the cage cautiously at first, clearly interested but not yet displaying any signs of aggression. The group stayed calm, each of them fascinated by the sheer size of the creature. But as time went on, the shark grew bolder, moving closer and closer to the cage. Megan and Chloe, floating just outside the cage in the water, exchanged excited glances, oblivious to the increasing danger. It wasn't until the shark suddenly lunged toward the cage, slamming into it with incredible force, that the calm was shattered. The impact reverberated through the water, and in that moment, everything changed. The shark, now agitated, began to circle faster, its movements more erratic. The group scrambled to get back inside the cage, but the shark's movements became unpredictable. Unbeknownst to anyone on board, Megan and Chloe had drifted too far from the boat and the cage. They had been caught in the excitement of the moment, mesmerized by the shark's presence, and hadn't noticed how far they had swum from safety. As the shark turned its attention to the boat, the crew on board scrambled to react. The boat's captain shouted instructions, but it was already too late. The shark, sensing the movement of the women, swam toward them with terrifying speed. Megan was the first to notice the danger, and her heart raced as she realized how far from safety they were. Before she could signal Chloe, the shark struck. Its massive jaws closed around Chloe's torso, pulling her beneath the surface with terrifying force. Megan screamed, kicking frantically to swim toward her friend, but the water turned red as Chloe's body disappeared into the depths. The panic was instantaneous. Megan tried to swim back toward the boat, her eyes searching the water frantically, but the shark was not finished. It surged toward her, its jaws opening wide, and with a single horrifying motion, it lunged at Megan. The force of the impact knocked her into the water, and the shark grabbed her leg, pulling her under. The water around her turned dark as she was dragged into the depths, her body twisting helplessly in the grip of the predator. The crew had been watching in horror, unable to reach them in time. The boat's captain called for immediate help, but they could do nothing but helplessly watch as the water began to settle. Megan and Chloe were gone. The shark, after a few tense moments, retreated into the depths, leaving nothing but silence. It wasn't until hours later that the Coast Guard launched a full search operation. By that time, there was no hope of finding the women alive. The boat crew could provide no additional details about the incident. All they could confirm was that both women had vanished without a trace. The search continued for several hours, with no sign of Megan or Chloe. It wasn't until a large great white shark was caught in a nearby fishing net that the full horror of the situation was revealed. The shark, a massive specimen, had been caught alive. When it was hauled aboard, the crew was horrified to discover the remains of both Megan and Chloe inside its stomach. Their bodies, though torn and mutilated, were unmistakably recognizable. The women's families were devastated by the confirmation of their deaths. The shark had likely been attracted to their movements in the water, mistaking them for prey. Experts speculated that the splashing and frantic movements of the women had drawn the shark's attention, triggering an aggressive response from the predator. The shark had attacked with brutal force, pulling the women into the water and killing them almost instantly. In the days following the discovery, debates erupted about the dangers of shark diving and the unpredictability of great white sharks. While the sharks were typically calm in the area, this attack had proven that even the most experienced divers could become victims. The tragic deaths of Megan and Chloe sparked renewed discussions about safety protocols for tourists in shark-infested waters and raised questions about the ethics of shark cage diving.